I recently found that out, and since it is not related to religion, I wonder why people do that. Story 1. It is entirely cultural. It was done by Protestants in the United States for a while, and then it became a matter of my son should look like me. Story 2. Kellogg, I think, was a doctor but only trained under a water healer. He believed that spices led to night emissions and lustful thoughts. He started a granola food, basically grains with a little bit of honey. He also believed it was harder to masturbate if you were circumcised. Story 3. It started as a religious practice. Now it is common among almost all males here in the United States. Fathers usually say they want their son to look like them. I never saw an uncut man until I went to college. Back then, dormitory showers were open and men had no issues being naked in the bathroom. Story 4. 19th century American society was rapidly modernizing but at the same time had some very reactionary tendencies. Many new religions emerged, and there was a general moral panic about society losing its morality, largely connected with the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved people and women. One of the individuals who sought to improve Americans' health was Dr. Kellogg, who promoted whole grains, exercise, abstinence from alcohol, and genital mutilation. His recommendations included burning female clitorises with carbolic acid and removing the foreskin because he believed that by removing the most sensitive parts, he could reduce sexual pleasure, leading to less sexual activity. Fortunately, the practice of female genital mutilation did not become popular. However, male genital mutilation did, and it was supported by many pseudoscientific explanations to justify the practice. It has fortunately been in decline for some time now. Story 5. It is unproductive to discuss cleanliness in a way that singles out women, as their anatomy is more complex than men's, especially concerning yeast infections, which are less common in men. The idea of altering female anatomy for cleanliness, such as circumcising the labia, is unlikely and would be inappropriate without consent. Story 6. Everyone is going to blame religion, but that was actually a small part of it, at least in the United States. It was thought to be a prevention method for diseases and ailments. Therefore, medical science was the main factor that promoted it. Story 7. I did foreskin restoration to regain what I could, and I have to say, it really feels like I was born to have one. It works better, feels better, looks better, and is healthier. It is cruel to damage children's genitals, and it should be banned, especially since adults almost never choose to have this done. We are literally forcing a choice on children that they would never make as adults. The most common reason I've heard personally is, it's cleaner, which is a terrible argument when we have running water and showers. It is terrible that this practice still exists. As a victim who sees the damage, it is tough to deal with. As an additional cruelty, if the procedure was done before the year 2000, it was mostly performed without pain relief. They just started crushing, ripping, and cutting. Story 8. It all comes down to the person who made cornflakes, thinking that unsweetened food would stop people from masturbating. Somehow, Kellogg came up with what was arguably the craziest idea ever: bring circumcision up and normalize it by making it feel like a very Christian thing to do to your son. Want your son to not masturbate or have premarital sex. Circumcise that baby. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's essentially the story. Story 9. It started as a way to prevent male masturbation during the Victorian era. Now it is a significant source of revenue for providers, so they continue the practice. Thankfully, the percentages have decreased. I saw something recently that said only half of newborns are circumcised. Story 10. It should be made illegal and considered genital mutilation unless there is an excessively long foreskin causing actual problems. Labia trimming is performed, but it is done after legal adulthood in the majority, if not all, cases. The real question is, why is male genital mutilation done prior to legal adulthood not considered genital mutilation and made illegal, while female labia trimming done prior to legal adulthood is not considered genital mutilation? Story 11. I am Canadian, and I feel like most of us born in the 1990s are circumcised. I know that I and all my friends are. Story 12. Kellogg's cornflakes. I'm not kidding. Well, not the cereal, but the actual person, John Harvey Kellogg. The late 1800s to early 1900s were a strange time, and it became common to circumcise boys to prevent masturbation and the loss of vital fluids. American circumcision is not religious, as many people think. It is more of a cultural practice influenced by pseudoscientific beliefs. Story 13. If you collected all the circumcised foreskin in the world, imagine how much foreskin you would have and what you could do with it. Story 14. Louis Sayre popularized circumcision in the United States in the mid-1800s as a cure for paralysis and other motor neuron disorders. John Harvey Kellogg, known for his work with cereals, also promoted circumcision later in the 1800s. Story 15. It is changing for what it is worth. My children are not. Most of my friends' children are not. My doctor said it is about 50-50 these days. Story 16. I'm male, and as far as I know, I can't tell them apart once they are hard. In my country, it is not normal to be circumcised, but my cousin was for medical reasons. He showed it to me, and it looks different when soft, but once hard I could barely see any difference. Story 17. Well, this has been a disturbing read. As a New Zealander and Australian, I have never given much thought to it. It just seems creepy to want to cut part of your child's genitalia off. What a bizarre thing to do. I am shocked it is so mainstream in the United States. It is also a waste of resources. Story 18. In American society, only women and girls' bodily autonomy is considered paramount. This emphasis often overlooks that a constitutional amendment calls for equal protections for all under the law. Type 4 female genital cutting is a minor procedure, but it is called mutilation, while removing erogenous tissue and multiple light-touch nerve bundles effectively reducing pleasure and sensation in males is considered acceptable. The logic is flawed. Story 19. It is a vestige of the mistaken belief that masturbation is harmful. Unfortunately, Christians once believed that any sexual behavior that did not result in the potentiality of a child was sin and, through accretion, believed that deviating from this in any way would result in all sorts of maladies. They derived this belief from misunderstanding the narrative of Onan, Judah's son, in Genesis 38. He was tasked by Judah, against his consent, to sleep with Tamar so that his brother Er would have an heir to his name. But Onan did not want to do that. So he went into her and spilled his semen onto the ground, and he was killed. The phrase spilled his seed on the ground literally means corrupted with semen the ground. It is clear even in Hebrew what happened. Onan had sex with Tamar, then pulled out right before ejaculating so that he ejaculated on the ground in front of her vagina instead of into her vagina. There was no masturbation here, and the whole reason he was killed, presumably by God, is that at this pivotal moment when Judah needed an heir, Onan basically said, I am glad my brother is dead because I hate him. I am going to violate his wife but deny him a legal heir by not producing a child with her. I am glad he is dead and that he will have no offspring to his name, even by my seed. But the idea that God struck him down for intentionally non-procreative sex persisted. As an aside, this cannot be upheld throughout Scripture. No such punishment is prescribed when a man has an emission of semen by any means that does not involve intercourse in the hygiene laws. In Proverbs chapter 5, Solomon tells his teenage sons to delight in the breasts of the wife of their youth always. In that same passage, he talks about their streams, springs, and fountains, adding that they should be for them alone and not for strangers. In Song of Solomon, the woman says that her lover is like an apple tree among the sons, one she wants to sit beneath and taste his fruit. Later, in chapter 7, he describes her navel as having the best mixed wine. Basically, the Mosaic Law passes no judgment on masturbation when it had multiple opportunities to do so. Solomon seems to suggest to his sons, with the ejaculatory imagery of Proverbs 5, that they should masturbate or have sex with their wives to keep themselves away from strange women who would, at best, waste them away with unhealthy promiscuous sex that would spread disease, and, at worst, lure them to be sold into sexual slavery to foreigners. Song of Solomon expresses a desire on the woman's part to perform oral sex on her lover, and Song of Solomon chapter 7 has the young man looking hungrily at her wet vulva while comparing it to a drink. All of these involve non-procreative sex and are described positively. The hygiene law is basically God's way of telling Israelite masturbators to make sure they wash up afterward. America and the United Kingdom were largely Christian countries, and they carried that mistaken ethos through their history. In the mid-1700s, the idea that sickness and disease were the result of some divine punishment began to be replaced by modern thinkers with more scientific explanations. However, they did not know how to explain the sin of onanism very well. There was also a perception that Jewish boys did not masturbate, everyone does, and eventually the association began to be made that this was because they were circumcised. In the 1800s, they did many horrific things to boys and girls to either make them stop masturbating or to prevent them from masturbating. That was when the medical establishment decided that the cure for masturbation might be circumcision. That is how John Harvey Kellogg came to recommend circumcision to cure masturbation, especially if done soon after a boy starts, as the pain might have a beneficial effect on the mind. He also recommended carbolic acid on the clitoris for girls who masturbated. Unfortunately, this led to a mass circumcision campaign in England and the United States. The United Kingdom had basically stopped doing that by the 1950s, Canada and Australia by the 1960s and 1970s, but the United States never stopped. It is unclear why, but I hope to be part of the solution. I have kept my own son intact despite myself being circumcised. I hope more American parents will join me in protecting our sons from genital mutilation. Story 20. Before the discovery of rubber, hair ties and elastic bands were hard to come by. Harvesting foreskins filled this societal need. Now, it is really just low-cost crumbed frozen calamari rings, so demand for the product has definitely dropped, though it is still widely practiced. Story 21. Because not mutilating your son means admitting to yourself that you have been mutilated by your own parents, and that is more difficult than just going with the flow. Story 22. The story is so unbelievable you would not believe me if I told you, and Reddit would ban me if I even tried. Just do not mutilate your son's genitals, okay? Let us end this cycle once and for all. Story 23. In my family, the older generations were born at home and were not circumcised. When World War II came, they were forced to have it done as adults and did not want their sons to experience that. Therefore, it was done for them at birth. Story 24. There was a special on Home Box Office that I saw years ago called The History of Sex. According to the show, one of the reasons it became popular in the United States of America is because they popularized the idea that it would keep adolescent boys from masturbating. This was interesting to me because when I was young, I wondered how attractive guys could masturbate when there was nothing to stimulate. I also wondered about the reference to some kind of lubricant when masturbating and why they would need that. Story 25. I do not know. There are probably many reasons, including some outdated beliefs about hygiene. If I had a son, I would not have had it done to him. Story 26. Without creating unnecessary tasks, there are no additional ways to make money from it. Americans are very good at that. Story 27. For babies born today, it is about 50-50 circumcised versus not. Therefore, the concerns that they will stand out or that a woman will not know what to do with it are no longer relevant for babies now. Story 28. I was told, though this may not be true, that there was a study in the 1940s or 1950s claiming certain practices were healthier, which then became widely accepted. However, as long as you maintain a hygiene routine, those health claims are not accurate. The study was simply confirming that not cleaning under the foreskin could cause problems. Around the same time, another study suggested that tight-fitting white underwear caused scrotal problems during puberty by preventing the scrotum from descending. This led to boxer shorts becoming the preferred underwear. My father mentioned he was forced to wear boxers as a child. However, properly fitting underwear does not cause problems. Story 29. So my son should be too. All the way back to Sir Kellogg, the cereal inventor, who advocated for it to stop boys from masturbating, no joke. Story 30. My parents are Catholics and had me circumcised after I was born. I did not have much of a say in that. Story 31. My experience is that single mothers do not know how to care for an uncircumcised penis, so they choose to have it circumcised. Story 32. I didn't have a choice. I was only a couple of days old. I didn't even know I was circumcised until I was already grown and heard of the concept of circumcision. I never saw any uncircumcised people growing up. I never bothered to ask my parents why they did it because it wouldn't change anything. Story 33. You will be hard-pressed to find a circumcised man who is complaining that he was mutilated. We do not remember it, and many of us are perfectly happy with it. If you have ever watched a baby get circumcised, they cry for about 2 minutes after the procedure and are fine. People make a bigger deal about it than necessary. I had a friend who was uncircumcised and got it done in his late teens. He said he did it because he was prone to infections beneath the skin, would ejaculate too quickly, and it would smell at times. He said it was painful getting it done as an adult, but he does not regret it at all and feels it is much more sanitary. You can keep your uncircumcised, we will keep our circumcised. Story 34. As an uncircumcised American, I feel bad for you circumcised guys. The head of my penis is very sensitive. Took some getting used to, but now it's amazing. Story 35. I have heard a few things. Christian lawmakers or biblical beliefs influencing conventions. It is said to be more sanitary and healthier because doctors want to grind up the foreskins into youth serums and sell them to the wealthy elite. I am sure it boils down to a combination of factors. Story 36. Do American Catholics and Orthodox men also usually get circumcised? Or is it mainly a cultural Protestant practice? Story 37. Greed drives the circumcision industry. Hospitals earn money by performing the procedure, and the skin is sold to pharmaceutical and cosmetics companies. Although some children die, profits continue to be prioritized. Story 38. Because Americans are lied to about many things, some doctors truly believe it is the right thing to do. It is really terrible. When my boys were born, the doctor tried to convince us that cutting was good for them. I said no. Now the choice is theirs. Story 39. If you knew that over 100 healthy babies are killed in the United States every year by this tribalistic practice, you might be even more baffled. Story 40. It is cleaner and looks better. I cannot say that on Reddit without receiving many downvotes, though. Just watch. They love to embrace their negative behavior. Story 41. Not sure how it started, but I am glad it did. I have heard it lowers the risk of certain sexually transmitted infections, is easier to clean, and even has some cancer reduction benefits. Personally, I think it looks better. Story 42. Social norms make it easier to maintain cleanliness and aesthetics. For those saying it is easy enough to clean if you know what to do, keep in mind most men are not thorough about cleaning themselves. I am not saying all or even most men should have it done. That is completely up to the individual or family, as infants cannot make an informed decision. Story 43. I am not sure how it started, but my Asian doctor seemed disappointed when we did not get my son circumcised. Doctors make extra money for it, so they always promote it. Story 44. Looks mainly. Since most of us are circumcised, we have never had to learn how to properly care for an uncircumcised penis and do not really want to learn. Story 45. I am an American and I honestly just assume that people do this because they want to mutilate babies. I understand that in the past, when we didn't know any better, people were just following orders. But nowadays, with technology being what it is, it makes no sense. If we were cutting women's outer labia to say, "Let me make it prettier for you," there would be a big problem. But since it's baby boys, no one really cares except for the parents who decide not to do this to their child. Maybe whatever created us wanted it that way, because if not, they would have done it themselves, and there would be no need for us to do it. I could understand if it was a birth defect they were correcting or something that affects only a few children. But every healthy baby boy is anatomically the same when born. So you tell me what's going on, because I understand what source everyone is using as a reason to commit child mutilation. If I remember correctly, that's the same source that told us many stories about how people who went against it or didn't believe in it were killed and tortured. I guess they are all scared, and that's why they still do it. Maybe it is something noble, like they are collecting all the foreskins to pay our way into heaven when we die, but only the foreskin Krampus knows the truth. Story 46. Health reasons. Circumcision, particularly when performed in infancy or childhood, is associated with a significantly reduced risk of developing invasive penile cancer. This protective effect is thought to be due in part to the prevention of conditions like phimosis and the accumulation of smegma, both of which increase the risk of penile cancer and are more common in uncircumcised men. Story 47. To be quite honest, they did that because when you are cutting your hand, you do not want to slip and accidentally punch yourself between the eyes. Story 48. Because our penises are large, no one will miss the extra skin. As a result, we appreciate good penis reduction surgery. Also, we are lazy. Getting a trim helps prevent buildup of smegma. Without a foreskin, no urine gets trapped, so there is no harsh odor, making partners more likely to perform oral sex. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it even if it's not entirely true. Story 49. I searched and found that circumcision started in the late 19th century for hygiene purposes and disease prevention. In the 1870s, Dr. Louis Sayre, an orthopedic surgeon, promoted it, initially believing it could cure various ailments, including paralysis. It was the cultural norm here. I am from Generation X, and until recently, only Jewish men were uncircumcised. You would be sexually shamed and bullied if you were not circumcised. I circumcised my sons because I read enough on Reddit and elsewhere about grown men needing the surgery due to chronic infections and painful sex. My sons would scream loudly if I touched their penises in the bath, a preference, not due to pain or sensitivity, and I could not imagine having to retract a foreskin to clean it properly. It was not pain or sensitivity because they would not let me near it for there to be pain or sensitivity. They did not touch their own penises until they got older, so cleaning it was not an option either. I am glad there is more open-mindedness in the United States now because it was socially difficult for uncircumcised men where and when I grew up. I will likely get downvoted. But a newborn getting circumcised is usually not a cruel procedure. Neither of my sons cried or seemed in the slightest bit of pain even immediately afterward. The pain was gone in about 10 minutes. Getting vaccinated had a much greater impact on them than their circumcision. They cried longer and harder when they had to pass gas. Story 50. I am assuming taste. My children are circumcised because my wife's mother was an elder care nurse, and it reduced infections as they aged and was low maintenance. Story 51. It is generally a religious practice. I do not know why you thought it was not. It is mentioned in the Bible almost 100 times in both the Old and New Testaments. Also, until the 1990s, it was taught that for health reasons, it was cleaner and carried less risk of infection. Story 52. Firstly, it is religion-related as circumcision is mandatory in Islam and Judaism. For some reason, it is not in Christianity. Secondly, from a medical perspective, the prepuce or foreskin releases a waxy material called smegma. Smegma can highly promote bacterial growth, which can often lead to infection. That is why it is usually better to be circumcised medically as well. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.